Today on IN, we've
What the
got
hell is that?
IN, like ET, Entertainment Tonight, IN,
We're not there yet.
Isolation Nation. You don't think so? Okay, Isolation Nation, 6 guests, 1 theme.
Michael, I see what you're doing, and it's appreciated. And forget everybody that always hated. And see, I do it at its peak. So shout out to the foundation and the charity, SickNotWeak.
Tessa Virtue. She is smart, she's interesting, she's compassionate. Perfect guest for today. Plus, she's the reigning queen of Canadian sport. 3-time gold medalist. Tessa Virtue today, in a way you've never seen her before. Without Scott and without hearing this.
Are you a couple?
What's up, y'all? James Wilder Jr., running back for the Montreal Alouettes.
I'm Michael Lansberg, quarterback for the Toronto Argos, and
Come on, ML. Ain't nobody gonna believe that.
Doing great. Thanks for having me today.
that's right, folks. It's the debut of the soon-to-be wildly popular Who's in the Isolation Nation green room.
It is between Rouse and Tewksbury. Here comes Mark Tewksbury. To the final 5 meters, Rouse and Tewksbury. It's gonna go to the wall, and on the wall, Tewksbury.
Serena Ryder. All of those hits, all of those awards, all of that electric love.
When they said that we will never last, we'll always survive. Our love's electric, alive and so.
It's a nation in isolation. It's a nation in isolation. It's a difficult situation. It's a nation in isolation. Now it's time to share some inspiration. Life is hard, life is tough. Sometimes you think you've had enough. But wash your hands, water and soap, and fill your heart with lots of hope. Yeah, it's a nation in isolation. It's a difficult situation. It's a nation in isolation. Now's the time to have some aspirations. Yeah, it's a hopeful time.
Sean Cullen, man, his story is also one that is really inspiring. He gave clues about the theme for today. Here's what the theme is. The theme is the one thing that if you have it, recovery's pretty good option. If you don't have it, really bad things happen. And that one word is...
Wrong word.
That one word is...
Still wrong.
That one word is...
Yeah.
Hope. Hope. We planned that, by the way. Hope is so important because when it's taken away, you really do think to yourself, what is the point? 6 stories of hope, starting first of all with Serena Ryder. What comes to mind, I don't know if anything does, but you would have experienced this many times, and that is the realization that you had done something important for somebody else, and that can come in the way of, speaking, at your concert, someone could yell, I love you, Serena, and tell you why, or, it could be a text or an email or in a million different ways. What comes to mind when you think of, okay, that person I impacted made it all worthwhile?
Yeah, actually, this just happened recently. I noticed a message on my Instagram, and I clicked on it, and this woman had said, "Hey, this song was the only way that I got through the day today. Thank you so much." And I was like, "Whoa, okay, and it was this young woman, and I clicked on it, and I was like, hey, are you feeling okay? Like, how are you doing?" And I was like, she wrote me back right away. She's like, "Oh my gosh, I didn't think that you'd write me." And then she said, "Hey, actually, I'm having a really tough time. Like, this is my situation. And I'm not going to share the personal parts of it, but she told me some really deep stuff that was going on in her life." And I was like, hey, almost like the deepest, darkest places that you can go to. And if you can go through them and you can stay present in them, will actually transform you, And I just mirrored back to her. I was like, hey, I see you and I see some real strength in you. And she wrote me back and just kind of shared so much about herself. And it was almost like I was talking to like a friend, in that moment. And she's like, you really did turn my life around by just responding. It's the simple things like when you reach out and you have that transparency and an open heart to share where you're coming from, and that's what I do through my music. I mean, I'm not a speaker necessarily. Like, I've started to do some talks about mental wellness and things like that, but that's not my forte. My forte is like, you know, writing songs and like sharing myself through that experience. But just being present and being human, it's like, it blew me away, and it made me feel like, wow, it's these tiny moments that are actually the most gigantic moments you can, and who knows what she's going to do in the world, right? Who knows who she's going to help and who she's going to touch, because she came from such a real intense background and such a lot of abuse in her life, and is now going to be able to go out there with this new strength, knowing that we related to each other and she has this power to change someone else's life by just reaching out, you know? Huge.
It's like a big game of tag, you know, it's like you were
Yeah.
it, and then you tagged her in, and now she's going to tag someone else. And, you know, the power that of the message is shocking to me every time. Every single time I get a message from someone who says, you know, it made a big difference to me, I go, wow, how did that happen? How did I find myself in my life using the worst thing in my life as one of the best things in my life? Like, I was totally shocked when I first started speaking about this on Off the Record in 2009. I was interviewing a hockey player, and I said to him, how you doing with your depression? And he said, oh, I'm doing okay, but it was terrible during the 1990s. I won a Stanley Cup, and I never smiled once. All I could think about was going home and getting into bed. And I said, oh, well, that's, you know, like, that's a pretty profound story. Me too, without the Stanley Cup. And we talked for like maybe 90 seconds, Serena. And the next day I started getting these emails from people saying, especially men, because it's less often that men speak about it than women, and women don't speak about it very often. But
yeah,
it was
because
like,
you're supposed to be so strong, right? You're supposed to be so strong and like have everything together. And it's like, oh, yeah, it's terrible.
so I was so shocked. I kept reading these things and going, wow, like, how did that happen? Because I wasn't trying to make a difference in anyone's life. I just was trying to ask an interesting question on a TV show, and that was it. And that changed my life, because I found out, you know, the power of sharing, and the deeper you go, the more effective you are. So if you said, hi, I'm Serena Ryder, and, you know, I've struggled with depression and other mental health challenges for, well, since I can remember. And you know what? It's been really tough. That's good. But if you said, hi, I'm Serena Ryder, and you know what depression does to me, you know how it makes me feel, you see me on stage, you see me performing, and you think it's all easy. Well, it's not. And let me tell you what it feels like. That's the gold for people. And that's what you do.
Yeah.
You know, like, you go way below the surface.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the most important thing, you know, is to be like, to share exactly what happens and what's happened to you, share your story, because it's like, it's transformative. It really is. And I love that you said, you know, your darkest thing actually becomes your, you know, your gift. And for me, it's like my, you know, I don't even call it mental health anymore. It's more like my superpower, you know, which is also, it's something that like is the thing that I feel like has always stopped me, is actually the thing that's my superpower in the world. When I sit with it and when I'm able to really allow it to transform me, is amazing. It's amazing.
Serena Ryder, our first story of hope today. And, you know, for me, the sign that she has made it back and that hope was there for her is the fact that, not that she won awards and wrote great songs, but that she can experience joy. Next up, Nate Burleson. He was a terrific receiver and kick returner in the NFL. He's also on the NFL Network. And before the show, I said, Nate, is anything out of bounds? And he said, ask me anything. And we put it to the test. What is your experience in the past with mental health?
Well, I remember the middle of my career. It's the first game of the season. I'm with the Seattle Seahawks, and we're playing against the Buffalo Bills. And I'm starting off the game. I tweak my knee. I don't know what's wrong, but something's wrong. My calf starts to cramp up. But then shortly after, I score a touchdown. So in my mind, because I'm a little bit of a glutton for pain, I'm like, I'll just fight through the pain and figure out what's wrong with my knee later. And I remember my trainer at halftime said, Nate, you should probably sit out. Something could be wrong. You have a high tolerance for pain. I wouldn't press your luck. So I said, no, we're good. If I can walk, I can run. If I can run, I can play. Just typical, you know, bravado that I don't live with now. And I go out there in the third quarter, Matt Hasselbeck, he looks at me and I'm wide open. I plant my left leg, and I'm thinking to myself, as soon as I catch this ball, I'm going to score my second touchdown, and I'm going to have a Pro Bowl season. 2 touchdowns in the first game of the season? Oh, I'm going to have like 15, 16 touchdowns. And my knee gives out. I'm on the ground. I'm kind of rolling around. It's not really painful. And then the trainers come over, and they're like, are you okay? What happened? I'm like, I don't know. You tell me. Who hit me? Who tackled me? And they were like, well, you were all alone. What are you talking about? I'm like, no, somebody hit me. They're like, no, your knee just collapsed. So I fast forward. After a long flight to Seattle, I walk into the equipment room, I walk into the training room, and the doctors are in there, and they close the door, and they're looking at me like my dog died. And they're like, sorry, so sorry. We misdiagnosed you on the sideline. You tore your ACL. Now, that didn't really put me into a funk or a depression. That came later. All that did was put me in a space where I had to look at the game from a realistic standpoint. At that point, I thought to myself, okay, how much money have I saved? How will I actually hit? When I was in Alabama, where I went to get my surgery, I went to Dr. Andrews, who is world-renowned. He does all the surgeries. And I'm sitting there in this hotel room day after day. My wife was initially with me, and then she leaves to go back and be with the kids in Seattle. So now I'm in Alabama, a place I've never been. I go to my hotel every day, and pre-surgery, post-surgery, rehab, it's the same routine. So it's something that I started to think about as I reminisce on this very depressed state I was in. I would listen to the radio, and I wanted the announcers to say my name. You know, this is a few weeks later. I wanted them to say, oh, how they desperately miss Nate, or, you know, we can't wait till Nate gets back, but they didn't. And it hit me because for the first time I realized I was indispensable and I wasn't as needed as I thought I was. And this is when it really got dark. I would go in, and after I kind of got cleared from the pain meds, I would go get a drink at the bar. And there was a bar at this hotel I was staying at. And the first time it was like, hey, give me a vodka and some ice. And I would drink that. Then the next night it's like, hey, make it a double. A few days later, it's, you know what, just I don't want any ice. Just kind of fill it up really good, man. And a week later, I remember walking in to that same bartender who saw me every day. Hey, Mr. Burleson, how you doing? How's your knee? I said, hey, listen, don't tell anybody, but here's a $100 bill. Could you give me a bottle of vodka and just send it up to my room? And one day I'm drinking the vodka straight. And I go to sleep fully clothed. And I'm not a guy that goes to sleep and passes out. I usually get prepared. I put on some hoop shorts and I lay down. And when I woke up with my shoes on, my pants still on, the outfit I wore from the day previous. And what was eerie about it was I woke up like with my arms kind of semi-folded. And immediately the first thing I thought of is this is the same position you're going to be in when you're in a casket. And
oh my God,
I realized like this bottle is, if I don't control it, is going to take me down a path that I might not recover from. So then I had to look in the mirror and was like, yo, tighten up, Nate. You're going to be able to jump higher, run faster. You're going to be able to bounce back. Whatever money you think you wasted, lost, or spent on frivolous things, you're going to be able to earn that back times 10, but you have to get your mind right. If you're at the bottom of this bottle feeling bad for yourself, then you're not going to be able to do anything for yourself, your wife, your family, or your extended family. So it took me a while to get out that funk.
How long would you say it took you to get from the deepest part of the hole? I refer to depression as kind of being in a deep, dark hole where the problem is when you look up, you can't see any light. That sense of hopelessness is pervasive, right? And that's when bad stuff happens. When people feel like there's no hope. That's when it gets really bad.
Yeah, it's kind of like you get so deep in this hole that every decision you make is based on the question, why not? Like, why not do it? Why not? Because who cares? Like, why not? You know, I can go back to ground zero because that's where I'm at right now. I'm familiar with this dark space. I feel comfortable in this dark space. I'm good in this dark space. And I even like started to tell myself, like, you know, you grew up decently. Like, you didn't have money growing up. Your dad played in the CFL. He wasn't a longtime NFL player. So like, you didn't have $1 million growing up. So if you reset to being broke, you know what that feels like. And I had to like banter with that same monster and say, well, wait a minute. You've earned the right to be successful. You earn the right to shift your family's fortune generationally. Like, you don't have to want to be in a dark place. But it took me a couple of years because, as you know, if you're ever depressed, the smallest thing can set you off. And you have to say, no, I'm good. The smallest injury, the smallest casualty in your life, or, somebody passing away. And then you start thinking, why is it always happening to me? Why is it always happening to my family? And then you figure out a way to kind of like, just fight. You know what I mean? Like you fight for your soul in a sense.
God, Nate Burleson is such a great guy. And you know what? How do you say hope? I would say it goes from imagining yourself in your own coffin thinking about suicide to being literally one of the happiest, most joyful people that I have ever met. Next up, one of my favorite people for sure. I mean, all of these folks are, but Tessa Virtue represents something so special for so many Canadians. You look at her today and you think, wow, she appears to have it all. Nobody has it all, but she appears to have it together. But that does not reflect where she was in the past.
Have you been touched by mental illness, either personally or through somebody that you care about?
I haven't personally, Michael, but of course, I think we all have someone in our lives who has been touched by mental illness, and I've seen up close and personal friends who have battled anxiety, depression, eating disorders, and it's tough. I think, on that continuum of emotions, that I've had lows. Certainly, I've had times of feeling really alone, and I can only imagine what that is like magnified. I try and wrap my head around what that feels like and what kind of support people need. And it's important to have conversations just like this, because the fear of reaching out, because of so many, that stigma that exists around mental health is really pervasive. But we need to be able to be open and share our vulnerabilities and realize that I think everyone faces self-doubt, faces, a lot of stress and anxiety. It's something that we all have to sort of strategize to cope with.
People, when they hear that you said that sometimes you felt really alone, would go, well, how does, one of the most famous people in the world of sport, and you truly are, like what you do is worldwide, right? It's not like figure skating is strictly in Canada. There's countries where it's even bigger than it is in Canada. So how could someone with that kind of success, and I know that this is, I don't believe this to be true, but this is how people think, how would you feel alone?
Well, I never felt like I fit in really anywhere, but especially not in the skating world. And I'm not sure if that's because I didn't buy into that toxic environment, or whether, my distancing myself prevented others from welcoming me in. And it's easy for me to look back and understand the times that I might have been bullied, that it was because it was threatening or we had success early on or any of those things. But I was really ostracized. And then I would go home to London, Ontario, and I wouldn't have friends there because I had moved away. And, it's just gearing up to head into the rink, knowing that, I was on my own was a struggle. But everyone faces things like that in moments in their life. And, I'm so lucky that I had people around me, like my mom, who I could talk to and rely on for support.
Yeah, you say everybody faces things like that. The thing about mental illness is the perception that nobody else has it. Nobody else is struggling. Nobody else is lonely. Nobody else feels isolated. Nobody else feels like, oh my God, I can't get out of bed in the morning. The perception is that your neighbor is always perfect in their house. And that obviously is not the case, but the value in speaking about your own struggles, whether it be like in my case, like real mental illness, like depression, or in your case, circumstances in life which left you feeling in a way that others would never believe that you were feeling. It's just so important. I mean, I just listening to you there, it was like, wow, oh my gosh, how helpful is that to someone who feels like they don't fit in?
Yeah, and there's this idea now, especially with social media, that how people present themselves is, everything you see and it's authentic. And there's so much behind that. It's so layered and nuanced for people. And we're all just looking at life through this unique lens of our own experiences and our histories. And I think we do have to break down those walls and just admit and open up about, you know, those fears that we faced. And as you say, that kind of shatter that idea that people have of you. And I think it's a responsibility, you know, when you're in the public eye as well.
Tessa Virtue, I've thought often, once she told her story about being bullied, if she thinks of those bullies when she has stood on the podium receiving gold medals. Doesn't seem like her, but most of us would do exactly that. All right, now it's time for Jordin Tootoo, the man from the NHL, played a decade. He is a guy that changed his life, transformed his life, and because of that, he represents hope for 1 million Native Canadians and Native Americans, and also anybody who's had an addiction. Jordin Tootoo.
When an opportunity came up, you know, there was nothing stopping me from leaving home because I thought life was better elsewhere, and but you know, it wasn't the case. Having to deal with a lot of different aspects of life. You know, I grew up in a very isolated community in the far north of Nunavut, Rankin Inlet, which is located right along the Hudson Bay. Grew up knowing everybody. Then I moved south, and it was a culture shock. I then was faced with a lot of racism and so on. And you know, for me, I was fortunate enough to have an older brother who guided me. He was 3 years older than me, and so I was you know, I was pretty catered by him as far as you know, being mentally strong and being able to put one foot forward in front of the other, no matter the situation. My brother was, he was my best friend. He was my mentor. He was my father figure. And still to this day, I am forever grateful that I spent 19 years of my life with him. He took his own life in 2002. And that's when my alcoholism really started to escalate into my professional career. I was, you know, a pretty functional drunk, so I thought. I was a binge drinker. Like Sean said, if it was in front of me and I had a day off the next day, once the cap was off, it wasn't going back on until it was done. So, and then, you know, throughout my professional career, things started escalating, and I knew that, you know, I was going to be the next victim if I didn't accept help.
Jordin, I mean, your story is really has a lot of dimensions to it, right? Given how you were brought up, the level of addiction that exists in your community, the level of mental illness, the racism that you faced. I'm wondering if you feel like, and I know the answer is yes, but if you felt like you were self-medicating, what did you replace the self-medication with when you decided 10 years ago, I'm done with this?
Well, honoring my brother's legacy, right? Because my brother Terrence was a true leader. He led by example. And, you know, when I decided that it was time for me to accept help, I lived by three sentences my brother left me. He left me a note and said, "Jor, go all the way," which meant, you know, make it to the NHL, take care of the family. My brother was a family man. He made sure he was kind of the mediator of our family. And then, you know, as a young kid, he would always tell me, "You are the man." And, you know, I believe in yourself, be comfortable and content in your own skin. So, you know, those 3 lines that he left me, go all the way, take care of the family, you are the man. When I entered rehab, I made sure that those 3 lines were beside my nightstand every morning I woke up. And the teachings that he taught me, and to really believe and to accept who you are and where you come from, definitely has helped me in sobriety. I was a man of few words. I didn't talk a lot. I didn't know how to articulate my thought process and put it to words, because I grew up in a house where nothing was ever talked about. You shut up and you put up with it. I didn't know how to express my feelings. I would just rage, and hockey was my out to rage. That's why I was in, the first 8 years of my professional career, I was an angry person inside. And thank God that I was able to fight and release those endorphins.
Jordin Tootoo's been on 3 times, actually. His last appearance, he talked about the note that his brother Terrence wrote for him before he took his own life. And the note said 3 things, and these will stay with me forever. Number 1, take care of the family. Number 2, you are the man. And number 3, go all the way. Terrence, such a tragic story, but Jordin uses it to provide him with hope. Okay, now, speaking of hope, how do you say hope? Well, I would say it's going from a hospital bed, thinking about ending your life, to having the strut and the cockiness and the joy like James Wilder.
Earlier in my life, I was diagnosed with ADHD in college. Going through high school, I was the son of James Wilder, my dad. He's Buccaneers Hall of Fame. I'm #1 rated player in the nation. And then I get to college and faced a little bit of adversity for my football career for the first time. And I struggled with it. I had anxiety. I had ADHD. I was diagnosed with it. I started to take Adderalls. And I was struggling with adjusting to the fame. I was kicked out of the school. Not kicked out, but suspended due to a charge. I was arrested. And man, my whole world was crumbling. I didn't know how to handle it. I was embarrassed to go back home. I couldn't participate with football. I couldn't go to class. So I was just kind of alone in a college town, away from the family. And I struggled with it pretty bad.
Yeah, I mean, who wouldn't? When you add all of those things up, I mean, that's a recipe for really struggling and for questioning, what does the future hold for me? So what pulled you out of the hole? Was it just getting back into football and then doing the kinds of things you did on the football field, or what?
Well, of course, I had great people around me. Somebody who helped me, Tony Dungy, is a guy he's like an uncle with me, and he's helped me out on numerous occasions to be able to just give words of wisdom. Of course, I have my father. I had a life coach as well. But I mean, just being able to face the reality that, listen, you're not alone. You're not the only one who struggles with mental issues, not mental issues, but just anxiety. And I'm not the only one struggling with that. So I just faced that. And once I faced it and kind of used that as a positive, to be able to use that downtime to talk to high schools and talk to different people in the community to help myself, even though I was explaining to them to try to better them, it also helped me coming out my shell.
One of the first things I ever did in mental health in broadcasting was I produced a documentary, and it was called Darkness and Hope, Depression, Sports, and Me. And I was the me. We ended up interviewing 3 people for it. One of them was Darryl Strawberry. And Darryl Strawberry said something that really stuck with me. He said, man, because he suffered from suicidal depression when he was in his teens. And he said, as a Black young person in my community, I could never, ever have said, hey, I think I need to see a psychologist or a psychiatrist. Do you think that still exists in your community? Because ironically, I talk about my community, I think it does still exist.
It definitely does in my community. And to touch on that, not too many people actually know, but I was hospitalized in college. I tried to commit suicide myself. And yeah, in 2012, during that time, I took just the whole bottle of Adderall, and I was just trying to end myself. My now wife, she ended up finding me, ended up calling the police and calling the ambulance. And at that point, I was too drugged to really even remember anything. But I just remember still at that point, I was just embarrassed. I was like, please, like, if I live, I don't want anybody knowing about this. I don't want to see this in the news, or I don't want to live if this is going to be in the news. I just remember saying that. And that I was in such a dark place when I was in college. And after that is once I really kind of seeked help and knew that I wasn't alone. I talked to a lot of people, of course, that was put in touch with me. But once you really figure out that you're not alone and you could fight the fight, and there's groups and there's people out there that can help you and that's been through what you've been through and even worse, that really helped me out, because I seen if these people can make it and they've been through exactly what I can been through, I'm blessed. You know, we're not homeless. We're not, you know what I'm saying? We have food. We know where our next meal is coming from. I started to realize that I'm really blessed to really kind of be complaining about me not playing football, you know, killing myself because I can't play football. And once I figured that out, that I had a team around me, I used that team. And then eventually I used myself to kind of spread awareness on it that they're not alone.
James Wilder, I had never met him before. That was a total shock. He never said in advance that he had tried to take his own life. He's huge in the Black Lives Matter movement. He's been on the streets marching every day in Houston. And finally, the story of hope is Mark Tewksbury. You may remember him from 1992, Olympic gold in the 100-meter backstroke. But here's the thing. Mark Tewksbury's story, as incredible as it was to win the gold, that's not even the most significant part.
I really feel for all people living with depression, because I grew up with it early in my life. I grew up with it. I call it, I think it was situational in a big way for me. And I know for many people it's chemical. For me, it was very much, yeah, exactly. And so for me, it was really my own thinking and my own psychology, especially growing up different in a time where, you know, this gay thing, not to make light of it, but, you know, in 1978, growing up in the suburbs of Calgary, realizing I was different and seeing the reaction to people like me on a television show like Dynasty, which I know sounds ridiculous, but that is literally the only exposure I had. And Billy Crystal's character on Soap, like that's it for people like me back in that time. And Stephen Carrington would come on, and my dad would say, like, "Oh, this is disgusting." You know, my parents would deplore the storyline. And so something happens in that moment. And for me, it was like, I'm disgusting. And that tape started. And it led to very, very severe depression, not attempted suicide, but many thoughts of suicide constantly. Because it happened so young, I was 13, 14. I know what it's like at that age to feel like there's just no solution. And so the only way out is death or suicide, or, you know, just will make it so much easier. And that was my go-to kind of safety mechanism. It was, when things got bad, it was like, well, I could always kill myself. And that's a pretty depressed state of mind. That's a pretty sick, not weak state of mind.
Yeah,
so
it is. But
I understand the feeling.
Right, but you know, what you just described there is you know, I'm not sure I've heard it said exactly like that. I don't mean the circumstances and the dynasty, but I mean the idea that you could take some sort of comfort, not traditional comfort for sure, and the hope in your life was that if this gets worse, I can end my life. So your hopelessness actually led to hope, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's very confused. And it was very confusing for me for a long time. Yeah, I totally agree. I think you've captured it exactly. And to be perfectly honest, when I first met you, even in the late 1990s, when I lived in Toronto, I still had that thought. When the subway would come up, the TTC, every time the subway came, I thought of what it would be like to jump in front of that train. Not that I felt like doing it, but my brain constantly looked for avenues of ways that I could get out.
And so that stayed with me, even though the intense depression that I felt in my teenage years left, the residue of those thoughts and that safety mechanism remained for a very long time. It was mid-30s before that left me.
You know, when you and I met, it would have been 1998, maybe 1999, somewhere around then. And that's when I got hit with my first real deep clinical severe depression. But I doubt you didn't know me before, so it's not like you had anything to measure it against, but guys like you, in describing your situation, and guys like me in my situation, you get really good at showing people not what you feel, but what you think they want to see in you. So it's like I'm in this conversation with you, and I think, okay, what does Mark want to see in me? Oh, he wants to see happy me, and he wants to see smart ass me, and he wants to see. I'm not referring to how I feel right now, but that is a huge concern, because you look at the people around you and you want to be in tune with how they are mentally. But sometimes if they don't want you to know, you don't know.
And I think when you talk about depression, so I think about that same person that you're talking about that's trying to fit the situation. What does that person feel like when the door is closed and you're all by yourself? To me, that was depression. That was like when it all fell, and that heaviness, and I can let it all go, and the thoughts, the loser, and the negativity, and yeah, for sure, Michael. And it made the being alone even more brutal.
Yeah. You know, when you were talking about your own experience and, you know, what you heard from your parents and realizing that how they would see you, which forced you, I'm sure, deeper and deeper into the closet, right? You were living out the ramifications of coming out and saying, you know, to your family that.
Mark Tewksbury, love that guy. Love all 6 of our guests. So candid, so open, so raw, so hopeful. Hope saved me. Because there was a time when I was in my deepest, darkest depression that I thought to myself, wow, you know, I don't know if I can keep battling this. And then I remembered I'd been through it 4 times before, and successfully overcoming that terrible spot gives you hope. And if you do not have hope, you must search for it. What does it say on my shirt case? Change is hope. If you wake up every morning and you think, oh God, you know, I can't go on. Oh God, I have nothing in my life that brings me joy. If that's what you think, you have to do something different. Make an appointment. Go on a vacation. Maybe not so much. Do something that's different than you did for the previous week or month or however long you've been struggling or battling. Change is hope. If you can't find it, ask someone. Ask me. I'll give you some ideas on how to find hope.